I was supposed to be at work, but instead, I was standing in the middle of our dimly lit garage, staring at the one thing that made my entire world crack apart in an instant. It was tucked away in the corner, half buried under a pile of old clothes, forgotten boxes, and some of Sarah's old gym equipment she swore she'd use but never did. It was her suitcase. Not just any suitcase, this one was packed. Fully packed. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it, grasping at explanations that didn't involve the worst-case scenario. Maybe she was organizing. Maybe she was planning a surprise trip for us. Maybe. No, none of that made sense. Not when I crouched down, unzipped the front pocket, and found a neatly folded stack of clothes, a travel-sized bag of toiletries, and, at the very bottom, a set of keys I had never seen before. They weren't ours. My hands were shaking as I pulled the suitcase out, unzipped the main compartment, and flipped through what she had packed. It wasn't just random clothes. It was carefully planned. Lingerie I hadn't seen in years, a dress I didn't recognize, and even a passport, as if she had somewhere far, far away she needed to be. I felt my stomach twist into knots as I stared at the contents, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. This wasn't some last-minute trip. This was premeditated. This was an escape plan. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped me out of it. I barely had time to shove everything back inside and push the suitcase behind some old boxes before the garage door began to creak open. Sarah stepped inside, her heels clicking against the concrete, her eyes briefly meeting mine before darting away. "You're home early," she said, her voice light, casual, but there was a tightness in her jaw that gave her away. "Yeah," I replied, forcing my voice to stay even. "Work finished early. Thought I'd come home, maybe surprise you." Her smile was forced, and I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the mental math she was doing as she tried to figure out whether or not I knew something. She walked over to the laundry basket, pretending to sort through it, her back turned to me, her shoulders stiff. I took a slow breath, gripping the edge of the workbench to steady myself. "Where were you?" She paused. It was brief, barely noticeable, but I caught it. "Out with Maya. We got lunch, did some shopping." Lies. I knew Maya had flown out to visit her sister 2 days ago. I had dropped her off at the airport myself. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, watching her closely, watching the way she moved, the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked, turning around with a carefully crafted expression of concern. "Yeah," I said, my voice calm. "Just had a weird day, I guess." I wanted to confront her right then and there. I wanted to ask about the suitcase, the keys, the passport, everything. But something in me told me to wait, to be patient, to let her think she still had the upper hand. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft, steady sound of her breathing beside me. Was she dreaming about him? Was she planning how she was going to leave, how she was going to break the news? Or was she waiting for the perfect moment to disappear without a word, leaving me with nothing but an empty house and an even emptier marriage? The next morning, she left for work like it was any other day, kissing me on the cheek, grabbing her coffee, and walking out the door without a second glance. The second she was gone, I got up, threw on some clothes, and went back to the garage. I pulled out the suitcase, opened it again, and grabbed the unfamiliar set of keys. I had to know. I spent the next 2 hours driving around, testing the keys on different locks. The mailbox. The front door. The car. Nothing. That meant it had to belong to something or someone else. A hotel? An apartment? A storage unit? Then it hit me. The gym. Sarah had signed up for some high-intensity boot camp 6 months ago, claiming she wanted to get in shape. I never questioned it. Why would I? She had a membership, she had gear, she even complained about how sore she was after workouts. But something about it never sat right with me. I drove straight there, gripping the keys so tightly in my hand that my knuckles turned white. I walked inside, acting casual, pretending I was just there to pick something up for my wife. The front desk girl barely looked up, too busy scrolling through her phone. I walked past her, scanning the rows of lockers until I found the one with a small, golden lock. My hands were sweating as I slid the key inside and turned it. The lock clicked open. I took a deep breath, pulled the door open, and stared at what was inside. A change of clothes, a bottle of perfume, a spare phone, one I had never seen before. My pulse hammered in my ears as I reached for it, my fingers trembling. I pressed the power button, and the screen lit up with a single notification. One new voicemail from unknown number. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and pressed play. "Hey baby, Just making sure everything's set for tomorrow. I booked the room under my name, so there won't be any issues. Can't wait to finally have you all to myself. Love you. I felt the blood drain from my face. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the gym suddenly too bright, too loud, too suffocating. People walked past me, laughing, chatting, completely unaware that my entire world had just collapsed in on itself. She had a room booked. For tomorrow. With him. I clenched the phone so tightly I thought it would snap in half. She was planning to leave, and I had just enough time to stop her. I staring at the phone screen like it was going to change what I had just heard. The voice on the voicemail was clear, confident, and far too familiar with my wife. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty in his tone, just the casual, expectant voice of a man who knew that tomorrow he'd be meeting another man's wife in a hotel room. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. I couldn't lose control now. The first thing I did was copy the voicemail. I needed proof, something undeniable, something that she couldn't twist or explain away. I transferred the file to my own phone, sent a copy to my email, and then turned my attention back to the locker in front of me. The spare phone wasn't locked, which meant she wasn't worried about someone else finding it. Or she never thought I'd be in this situation, standing inside a gym I had never set foot in, holding physical proof that my marriage had been nothing more than a joke to her. I scrolled through the messages. They weren't long, just quick, direct exchanges between her and whoever this guy was. Same place as last time, he had texted 2 days ago. Yes, 3 p.m., she had responded. Wear that red one, you know how much I love it. I closed the locker door, snapped the lock back into place, and walked out of the gym, nodding at the girl behind the desk as if everything was completely normal. My heart was pounding, my hands felt clammy, and my head was filled with noise. I didn't know whether I wanted to scream or drive my fist through the nearest wall, but I kept walking, kept breathing, kept my expression neutral. I couldn't let emotions take over, not yet. As soon as I got in my car, I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes for a moment, thinking. The affair was happening tomorrow. That gave me less than 24 hours to decide exactly how I was going to handle this. I had proof, I had the location, and I knew the time. There was no more guessing, no more paranoia. Now, there was only action. But before anything else, I needed to see who this guy was. I pulled up the phone's contact list and scrolled until I found his name. Aaron. Just a first name, no last name, but it was something. I checked the call log. They spoke every day, sometimes for over an hour, but always at specific times, early in the morning when I was at work, late in the afternoon when I wasn't home yet. My stomach twisted again, but I forced myself to keep going. I opened her photo gallery next, and there he was. Aaron. Tall, good-looking in an annoying, overly groomed kind of way, the kind of guy who probably spent too much time in front of a mirror. He wasn't some stranger either. I knew him. Not well, but enough. He worked at her office, one of the newer hires, someone she had casually mentioned in passing once or twice. Now I knew why. The worst part wasn't just that she was cheating. It was that she had been careful, meticulous even. There were no random calls to him on her actual phone, no pictures of him in her main gallery, nothing that could easily be found unless someone knew exactly what to look for. She had an entire separate existence, tucked away inside this cheap little burner phone, an entire life that didn't include me. I sat there for a long time, staring at his face, memorizing every detail. My blood felt hot, my skin prickling with the effort of keeping myself from throwing the phone across the car. I wanted to drive straight to her office, walk inside, and see if she'd be able to look me in the eyes and lie to my face the way she had been doing for God knows how long. But that would be too easy. I wanted her to feel this the way I was feeling it now. I exhaled slowly, turned the phone off, and put it in my glove compartment. Then I pulled out my own phone and started searching. It didn't take long to find what I needed. Aaron had an online presence, social media, work profiles, even a fitness blog where he posted about his journey toward peak physical performance. I scrolled through it all, piecing together the parts of his life that he had so willingly shared with the world. A girlfriend. Of course, he had a girlfriend. Her name was Melissa. She had been with him for 3 years, and judging by her posts, she was just as oblivious as I had been. She shared pictures of them on vacations, dinners, talking about how much she loved him. I clenched my jaw so tightly my teeth ached. I could tell her. That would be one option. Blow up his life the way he had blown up mine. But that wasn't enough. It was too simple. I needed something better. I leaned back again, tapping my fingers against the wheel, running through every possibility, every outcome. The smart move was to prepare, to wait, to make sure that when the time came, I had complete control over the situation. I needed to be in the hotel when she arrived. I needed to see her face when she walked in expecting him and found me instead. I needed her to understand, in the most brutal way possible, that I wasn't some clueless idiot she could fool forever. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., she would walk into that hotel thinking she was about to have another secret afternoon with her lover. Instead, she was going to find out exactly what happens when you betray someone who trusted you. The hours leading up to 3 in the afternoon felt like the longest of my life, every second dragging, my patience wearing thin as I sat in my car across from the hotel parking lot, waiting for the inevitable. I had gotten there early, too early, but I couldn't sit at home pretending everything was fine, not when I knew exactly what was about to happen. The hotel was nothing special, just an average business class place with tinted windows and an entrance discreet enough for people who didn't want to be seen. It was obvious why they had chosen it. At exactly 2:50, I spotted her car pulling in, smooth and effortless, like she had done this 100 times before. My pulse pounded in my ears as I watched her park, take a final look at herself in the mirror, and step out, her dress clinging to her in a way I knew wasn't for me. She was carrying a small overnight bag, nothing too obvious, but enough for me to know she wasn't just here for a quick chat. She smoothed down her hair, checked her phone, and then walked toward the entrance without hesitation. I waited a few minutes, giving her time to settle in, to get comfortable, to feel safe. Then I got out of my car and crossed the parking lot, my step steady, my breathing controlled, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Inside, the air conditioning was too cold, the lobby too clean, the receptionist barely looking up as I walked past. The room number was already burned into my mind from the messages on her second phone. I stood outside the door, listening. Laughter. Low voices. Movement. I gripped the handle, took a breath, and knocked twice. Silence. Then footsteps. When the door swung open, Aaron stood there, shirt unbuttoned, hair slightly messy, looking at me with an expression that shifted from confusion to shock to outright panic in the span of a second. "Hey, man," he started, but I didn't let him finish. I shoved past him hard enough that he stumbled back. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, barefoot, her face going pale the moment she saw me. She hadn't gotten far enough to be fully undressed, but her dress was wrinkled in a way that made me want to punch a hole through the wall. She scrambled to stand, reaching for something, her phone, maybe, or just something to hold on to, but her hands were shaking too much. "Steve," she started, but I cut her off with a sharp look. "Sit down," I said, my voice calm, controlled, but firm enough that she obeyed without argument. Aaron ran a hand through his hair, trying to regain his composure, looking at me like he was trying to decide whether he should say something or just keep his mouth shut. He made the wrong choice. "Listen, man, I think." "You don't think?" I snapped, my eyes locked onto him. "You don't do thing except stand there and keep your mouth shut." He swallowed hard, shifting on his feet like he wanted to leave but knew better than to try. Sarah was staring at me, her eyes pleading, searching for something, an explanation, an excuse, a way out. "How long?" I asked, not looking at her, keeping my focus on the floor, because if I looked at her face, I wasn't sure I'd be able to control myself. She hesitated, just for a second, just long enough for me to know whatever she was about to say would be a lie. 6 months, she finally whispered. A half a year. I let that sink in, let the weight of it press down on me, but I didn't let my expression change. I had already known it had been going on for a while. Hearing her say it out loud just confirmed what I had already accepted. "Why?" I asked, still not looking at her. She exhaled sharply, rubbing her hands together like a nervous tick. "I don't know." "Wrong answer." "I mean it, Steve," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know. It just happened. Things between us haven't been." I finally looked at her, and she stopped mid-sentence, like she could feel the shift in the room. "Things between us haven't been what?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. She swallowed hard, shaking her head. "I don't know. We drifted. You stopped trying, I stopped trying, and then you decided to sleep with some guy from work instead of talking to me?" I finished for her. She flinched like I had slapped her. "It wasn't like that. Then how was it?" I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Explain it to me, Sarah. Make me understand how the woman I've loved for 12 years, the woman I trusted more than anyone else in this world, decided that instead of fixing our problems, she'd rather sneak off to a cheap hotel with this wimp." Aaron stiffened, but he didn't say anything. Smart. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes shining with tears, but but I didn't care. I didn't feel sympathy, didn't feel anything except a burning coldness that settled deep in my chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You're not sorry. You're just sorry you got caught." She shook her head, biting her lip like that would stop her voice from trembling. I was going to end it. Another lie. I can see it in the way her fingers tightened around the sheets, the way her gaze darted away. "You weren't going to end anything," I said. "You were going to keep this going until you got bored, or until he found someone else, or until I found out, and then you'd cry and beg for forgiveness and hope I was stupid enough to take you back." "Steve, please," she whispered, but I was done listening. I turned to Aaron. "Get out." He hesitated, like he wanted to argue, but I wasn't in the mood to entertain whatever excuse was forming in his head. "Now," I said, taking a step toward him. He grabbed his shoes and jacket, avoiding my eyes as he pushed past me and out the door. The second it clicked shut, I turned back to Sarah, watching as she wiped at her face like that would erase what had just happened. "I'll pack my things," I said, my voice flat. Her head snapped up. "What? You heard me." Her lip quivered. "No. Please, Steve, we can fix this." "There's nothing left to fix." She started crying, reaching for me, but I stepped back before she could touch me. "Don't," I said. "You don't get to cry, Sarah. You don't get to beg. You made your choice." She opened her mouth, but I didn't wait to hear what she had to say. I turned, walked out, and let the door slam behind me. Walking out of that hotel room should have felt like a victory, like some kind of righteous moment where I took back my dignity and left her to sit in her own destruction. But as I made my way through the hallway, past the front desk, and back to my car, there was no satisfaction, no relief, just a sickening emptiness that made my hands shake as I gripped the steering wheel. She had begged, cried, tried to act like she still had some control over this, but she didn't. Not anymore. She had been caught, exposed, left with nothing but whatever excuses she could scramble together, and while part of me wanted to just walk away and let her live with that failure, the smarter part of me knew that wasn't enough. She had been planning to get away with this, to keep lying, to keep humiliating me behind my back. She had built an entire secret life while expecting me to keep playing the fool. That wasn't something I could let go. I had spent the last 12 years being the good husband, the reliable one, the man who showed up, supported her, made sacrifices without question, all because I had believed in the life we were building together. Now, looking back, I realized that while I had been putting everything into our marriage, she had been treating it like a convenience. A stable, comfortable, dependable man at home while she went out and indulged herself with a younger guy who probably didn't even see her as anything more than an easy conquest. That was the part that made my stomach turn, the realization that she had thrown away everything we had built for a fling with a man who didn't even respect her enough to fight for her when I confronted them. Aaron had left without a word, not once looking back at her, not trying to defend her, not caring what happened next. And she had sat there, exposed, desperate, alone. That's when I made the decision. Walking away wasn't enough. She needed to feel this. She needed to lose something real, something that actually mattered to her, just like I had lost my faith in her, my trust, my home. She needed to know what it was like to have the ground ripped out from under her feet. I drove home with a purpose, my mind racing through every step of what needed to be done. The moment I stepped inside, I grabbed my laptop and started working. The first thing I did was send an email to our joint financial advisor, letting him know that I wanted a temporary freeze on our accounts, citing marital concerns as the reason. It wouldn't be permanent, but it would slow down any attempt she made to take money out before I could separate our finances. Next, I drafted a resignation letter on her behalf and emailed it to her office, sending it directly to her boss with a message saying she was stepping away due to personal matters. I knew how much her job meant to her, how much of her identity was wrapped up in her career, and I wanted her to feel the same sense of loss I was feeling. Then I started packing. Not my things, hers. I went through every drawer, every closet, every little space where she had left traces of her presence in our home. I pulled her clothes from hangers, shoved them into trash bags, grabbed the expensive shoes she had bought with our money, and tossed them onto the growing pile. Her makeup, her jewelry, the things she had carefully arranged in our bathroom as if this was still a home she belonged to, I took it all and piled it at the door. She would come home and find it waiting for her, every single piece of her life with me thrown together without care, the same way she had treated our marriage. By the time I was done, I felt something close to satisfaction. It still wasn't enough, but it was a start. I wasn't going to let her walk back into this house like nothing had changed. She had made her choice in that hotel room, and now she was going to live with the consequences. Just as I finished tying up the last trash bag, my phone buzzed. A message from her. "Steve, please. We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing a response. "Nothing left to talk about. Come get your stuff. It'll be outside." Not even a minute later, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Another message came through. "Please, don't do this like this. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Please let me explain." I turned my phone off. An hour passed before I heard her car pull into the driveway. I didn't go outside, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me. I just stood by the window, watching as she stepped out, her face a mess of dried tears and exhaustion, her hands trembling as she stared at the trash bags piled in front of our house. She didn't move at first, just stood there, breathing heavily, like she couldn't believe this was really happening. Then she reached for her phone, probably calling me, probably thinking I would open the door, let her inside, let her try to talk her way out of this. I didn't move. She tried knocking next. Softly at first, then harder, her voice muffled through the door. "Steve, please. Just let me in. Please." I stayed where I was, arms crossed, jaw clenched, waiting. Another knock. "I know you're in there. Please, don't do this like this. We need to talk." No, we didn't. After a long, tense silence, she finally moved to the pile of her things, lifting one bag, then another, her shoulders sagging with every second that passed. I watched as she loaded her car, stuffing her life into the back seat, her movements slow, reluctant, like she was still hoping this wasn't real. She stood by the driver's side door for a long time after she was done, her hands gripping the edge of the roof, her head bowed. I could almost see the thoughts running through her mind, the realization settling in. She had lost. Then, finally, she got in the car, closed the door, and drove away. I turned away from the window, exhaling slowly, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start. I didn't hear from Sarah for 3 days. Not a call, not a text, not a knock at the door. I expected more of a fight, more desperate attempts to get back inside my head, to get me to reconsider, but instead, she disappeared. Maybe she thought giving me space would make me soften up. Maybe she needed time to figure out what to say, or maybe she was just too ashamed to try. Whatever the reason, I didn't care. I was done waiting for her to explain herself. On the 4th day, I sent her a message. "We need to meet. Today. My place. 7 p.m. I didn't say why, didn't ask if she was free, didn't leave room for discussion. If she wanted any kind of closure, any kind of final say, she would show up. At exactly 7 p.m., her car pulled into the driveway. I stood by the front door, arms crossed, watching through the peephole as she hesitated before stepping out. She looked rough, like she hadn't slept, like she had been carrying the weight of her choices for the past few days. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, her usual makeup was gone, and she wore a simple hoodie and jeans, nothing like the woman who used to obsess over her appearance before stepping outside. She looked like someone who knew they had lost. When I opened the door, she took a breath, straightening her shoulders like she was trying to pull herself together. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She walked past me, slow and cautious, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. She looked around the living room, her eyes moving over the space that used to be hers, the furniture we had picked out together, the walls that once held pictures of us. I had taken most of them down. She noticed. "You've been busy," she said, her voice quiet. I didn't respond. I walked past her, sat down on the couch, and gestured for her to do the same. She hesitated before lowering herself onto the chair across from me, her hands gripping her knees, her entire body tense. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, watching her reaction. She inhaled sharply, blinking rapidly, like she had been hoping I wouldn't say those words. "Steve, please." "There's nothing you can say that changes this," I cut her off. "Nothing." She shook her head, exhaling slowly. "I don't want a divorce. I don't care." She flinched, like my words had physically struck her, but I didn't let up. "You didn't want a divorce when you were sneaking around behind my back either, but that didn't stop you." "I wasn't thinking," she said, her voice cracking. "I was stupid. I was selfish. I know that. But I never stopped loving you." I laughed, shaking my head. "You don't get to say that. You don't love someone and betray them for 6 months. You don't love someone and plan a whole separate life behind their back. You don't love someone and walk into a hotel room with another man while your husband is at home wondering why everything feels off." She covered her face with her hands for a moment before looking at me again, her eyes filled with something close to desperation. I made a mistake. You made a choice, I corrected her. She wiped at her face, taking a shaky breath. I'll do anything to fix this. There's nothing to fix, I said. It's broken. You broke it. She shook her head quickly, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. I can be better, Steve. I can prove it to you. Just give me a chance, please. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Tell me something, Sarah. If I hadn't caught you, would you have stopped? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Exactly, I said, leaning back. She exhaled, staring at the floor. I was scared to lose you. I let out a bitter chuckle. That's funny, because you sure as hell weren't scared when you were sneaking around with him. She clenched her hands together, shaking her head. I didn't want to hurt you. I felt something inside me snap. You didn't want to hurt me? My voice was louder now, the calm cracking. Sarah, do you have any idea what the last few days have been like for me? Do you have any idea what it feels like to realize that the person you trusted most in the world has been lying to your face every single day? To know that while I was at home, loving you, believing in you, you were out giving yourself to someone else? You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we had. Tears were falling freely now, her shoulders shaking, but I didn't feel bad for her. Not even a little. I don't know who I am without you, she whispered. I shook my head. That's not my problem anymore. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the moment she realized there was no coming back from this. She had lost. Not just me, not just our marriage, but every ounce of respect I had ever had for her. I'll sign whatever you need me to, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. Good. She stood slowly, wiping at her face, hesitating like she wanted to say something else, but I didn't give her the chance. I stood too, walking to the door and opening it, waiting. She looked at me one last time, her eyes searching for something that wasn't there anymore. Then she stepped outside, pausing on the porch, gripping the railing like she needed to steady herself. Goodbye, Steve. I didn't respond. I just closed the door. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't just the absence of Sarah's voice or the sound of her footsteps moving through the rooms. The first night after she left, I sat in the living room for hours, staring at nothing, letting my mind replay everything that had happened. I had spent so much energy being angry, so much time planning my next move, waiting for her next excuse, but now there was nothing left to fight. The all was over, and I had won, though it didn't feel like victory. The next morning, I started the process of officially separating our lives. The first call I made was to the bank to move all my direct deposits into my personal account. The joint account we had shared for years was closed within the hour, leaving her to figure out her finances on her own. I wasn't going to let her coast on what I had built. The next step was the legal paperwork. The divorce would be straightforward. No kids, no shared business, just the house, which I had no intention of letting her keep. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, stating in clear terms that I wanted it handled as quickly as possible. There was no reason to drag this out, no settlement to negotiate, no alimony to discuss. She had made her choice, and I was making mine. The hardest part was telling people. I didn't want to deal with the pity, the questions, the fake sympathy, but I knew it had to be done. The first call was to my parents. My mother was furious, my father quieter, but both of them made it clear that they were on my side. They had never fully trusted Sarah, had never understood why I put her on a pedestal, and now they didn't have to pretend. My closest friends reacted the same way, shock at first, then anger on my behalf. One of them asked if I wanted to go out and drink until I forgot everything, but I wasn't in the mood for distractions. I needed to feel this, to sit with it, to let it sink in so that when I finally moved on, I wouldn't carry any lingering doubt or regret. Then there was Aaron. He had been silent since that day at the hotel, probably hoping I would just let it go and move on. That wasn't going to happen. I had no interest in revenge beyond what I had already done, but I wanted him to understand exactly what kind of mistake he had made. I found his social media, scrolled through his carefully curated life, and sent everything I had collected to his girlfriend. Screenshots of texts, photos, the voicemail where he had planned their little rendezvous. It all went straight to her inbox. I didn't add a message, didn't need to. The truth was enough. Less than an hour later, his profile disappeared, either deleted or locked down in a pathetic attempt to control the damage. It didn't matter. He was dealing with his own fallout now, and I wasn't going to waste another second thinking about him. By the end of the week, the house felt different. The spaces she had filled were empty. The routine we had built was gone, and for the first time in years, I was alone in a way that didn't feel suffocating. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was close. The legal process would take time, and there would still be loose ends to tie up, but I had already done the hardest part. I had confronted the truth, torn everything down, and taken the first steps towards something new. The last thing I did that night was delete her number. Not because I thought she would try to reach out again, she wouldn't. She knew there was no fixing this. But because I didn't want to carry her name in my phone any longer. She was done, erased, just another mistake that I would never make again.